The marble lobby of Reed Technologies echoed with cruel laughter. Victoria Reed stood in her $1,000 suit, pointing at the man holding a mop, her voice dripping with contempt. "You want to volunteer for our charity helicopter event? You?" The crowd of executives circled closer, phones raised, recording what they assumed would be viral entertainment. Jake Sullivan's calloused hands tightened on the mop handle, his weathered face betraying nothing. Then Victoria delivered her challenge, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tell you what, fly this helicopter and I'll marry you." The lobby erupted, but none of them knew that the janitor they mocked had once been called the Ghost, a pilot whose legend still circulated in classified military files, a man who had walked away from everything because the weight of his past had become unbearable. Jake Sullivan arrived at Reed Technologies every morning at 5, 2 hours before anyone else, before the city fully woke, before questions could be asked. The 47-story building rose like a glass monument to ambition, and Jake cleaned it floor by floor, invisible as the air people breathed. He had worked there for 3 years, mopping hallways, emptying trash, maintaining the spotless facade that successful companies required. Nobody looked at him twice. Nobody asked about his past. That was exactly how he needed it. His apartment was small, a 2-bedroom place in a neighborhood that developers hadn't discovered yet. Riley's room was larger than his, filled with books and art supplies and the medical equipment that had become part of their lives. His daughter was 12 now, brave beyond measure, fighting leukemia for the 3rd time. The treatments were experimental, expensive, the kind that insurance companies found creative ways to deny. Jake's military pension covered rent and basics, but basics wouldn't save Riley's life. So he mopped floors and swallowed his pride and stayed invisible, because visibility meant questions, and questions meant revealing who he used to be. Victoria Reed represented everything Jake had learned to avoid. She was 38, self-made, brilliant in that cutting way that left scars on everyone around her. She had built Reed Technologies from a borrowed money startup into a billion-dollar empire, and she ruled it with absolute control. Her heels clicked against polished floors like a metronome counting down to someone's failure. Employees scattered when they heard her coming. Jake had learned to time his cleaning routes to avoid her, had perfected the art of becoming furniture when she passed. For 3 years, it had worked, until the charity event announcement appeared on every bulletin board in the building. Reed Technologies would host its annual fundraiser at the downtown heliport, featuring helicopter tours for major donors and a silent auction benefiting children's hospitals. Jake read the notice 3 times, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. The irony wasn't lost on him. His daughter needed exactly the kind of help this event claimed to provide, yet the participation fee exceeded his monthly rent. Still, something made him fill out the volunteer application, made him check the box asking about special skills, made him write in careful letters, helicopter pilot, 20 years experience. The rejection came within hours, a form email that barely pretended at courtesy. Your current position makes you unsuitable for public-facing roles. Jake deleted it and told himself it didn't matter. But that night, lying awake while Riley slept in the next room, he remembered what it felt like to matter, to have skills that made a difference, to be someone people respected instead of ignored. The memory hurt worse than he expected. The morning of the charity event, the building buzzed with preparation. Caterers rolled equipment through loading docks. Florists transformed the lobby into something glossy and artificial. And Victoria Reed orchestrated everything with the precision of a general commanding troops. Jake pushed his cleaning cart through the chaos, intending to finish his work before the festivities began, when he heard someone call out, "Hey, janitor!" Not his name, just his function. Victoria approached with her usual entourage of executives, and in her hand she held a printed copy of his volunteer application. Jake's stomach dropped. "Is this a joke?" she asked, her voice carrying across the marble expanse with perfect acoustics. "You think you can fly helicopters?" The executives laughed on cue, and Jake felt every eye in the building turn toward him. He wanted to explain about the 3,000 hours he had logged in combat zones, about the Medal of Honor citation that sat in a box under his bed, about the men and women who owed their lives to his ability to fly through impossible conditions. But the words stuck behind 3 years of practiced silence. I have experience, he said quietly, hating how small his voice sounded. Victoria's smile sharpened into something predatory. She turned to her audience, performing for them with practiced ease. Experience! Our janitor has experience flying helicopters. Tell me, do you also perform brain surgery in your spare time? The laughter grew louder, and Jake felt heat crawl up his neck. He should walk away, should return to his closet and his mop and his carefully maintained invisibility. But something in him, some fragment of the man he used to be, refused to back down. I can fly, he said, louder this time, meeting Victoria's eyes directly for the first time in 3 years. The lobby went silent. Victoria walked closer, close enough that Jake could smell her expensive perfume. You can fly, she repeated slowly, turning each word into a weapon. Well then, let's make this interesting. The event starts in 3 hours. We have a helicopter waiting at the heliport. You fly it. Really fly it, not just hover in circles, and I'll personally donate $100,000 to the Children's Hospital Fund. I'll even marry you, since you're clearly such a catch. The crowd exploded in laughter again, people recording on their phones, anticipating viral entertainment. Jake stared at her, doing calculations that had nothing to do with pride. $100,000. That was Riley's treatment, her fighting chance, her possibility of seeing 13 and 14 and 15. He looked at Victoria's mocking smile, at the executives enjoying his humiliation, at the security guards already moving closer. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to preserve the anonymity that kept Riley safe. But when he thought about his daughter's pale face and her 12 birthday candles that might be all she ever got, the decision made itself. 3 hours, Jake said, his voice steady now, carrying authority that made several executives step back instinctively. I'll meet you at the heliport. Victoria's smile flickered, just for a moment, as if she hadn't expected him to accept. Then it returned, brighter and sharper. Wonderful. This will be the best entertainment we've had in years. Don't be late. She walked away, laughter following her, leaving Jake alone in the lobby with his mop and his impossible promise. The heliport occupied prime waterfront real estate, a concrete pad surrounded by safety barriers and offering spectacular views of the harbor. Jake arrived 90 minutes early, wearing the only clean clothes he owned that weren't coveralls, khaki pants and a navy shirt that had seen better days. The helicopter waiting on the pad was a Bell 407, and just seeing it made something in his chest tighten. He walked the perimeter slowly, checking the aircraft with eyes that automatically catalogued details. Rotor condition, landing gear, fuel ports, every mechanical element that could mean the difference between flying and falling. You're early. The voice belonged to a man in his 50s, former military by his bearing, who approached with a clipboard. I'm David Walsh, flight coordinator. Victoria said we were giving someone a chance to make a fool of themselves, but I didn't expect anyone to actually show up. He held out his hand for Jake's pilot license, and Jake pulled it from his wallet. Federal Aviation Administration credentials he hadn't looked at in 3 years. David's expression changed as he read it, skepticism giving way to confusion, then shock. Sullivan, he said slowly. Jake Sullivan. Holy hell, you're the ghost of Kandahar. You pulled 12 men out of a hot zone in a bird that should have crashed. That was a long time ago, Jake said quietly, taking his license back. I'm just here to fly your helicopter. David stared for another moment, questions flooding his eyes, but military discipline held them back. Pre-flight checklist is in the cockpit. Fuel's topped off. Weather's clear. Good luck, Ghost. The call sign hit Jake like a physical blow. Ghost, what they had called him because of his ability to appear out of nowhere, to extract the impossible, to fly missions that existed only in classified files. The crowd arrived in waves, executives in tailored suits, donors in designer dresses, media representatives with cameras ready. Jake watched from the edge of the pad as Victoria worked the crowd with practiced charm, her crimson dress catching the late afternoon light. The event's official program listed speeches about charitable giving, silent auction announcements, and then, almost as an afterthought, special entertainment, staff demonstration. Jake's humiliation had been scheduled between the champagne toast and sunset tours. Victoria found him 20 minutes before showtime. "I didn't actually think you'd show up," she said, looking him over like a science experiment. "Most people know when they're beaten." Jake met her eyes, seeing past the designer dress to the emptiness beneath. "I'm here to fly," he said simply. That was the deal. Victoria's smile sharpened. "The deal was that you actually fly, aerial maneuvers, a real demonstration, and when you can't deliver, when you embarrass yourself in front of everyone here, I want you to understand what happens when people forget their place. You clean floors. That's all you'll ever be." Jake climbed into the cockpit, settling into the pilot's seat with the ease of muscle memory that transcended time. His hands found the controls without conscious thought, and for the first time in 3 years, Jake Sullivan allowed himself to remember who he used to be. The pre-flight check took 12 minutes, his hands moving through the sequence with precision that surprised him. He keyed the radio, hearing David's voice crackle through the headset. "Tower to November 74 Golf. You're cleared for demonstration. Try not to kill anyone. Good luck, Ghost." The turbine spooled up with a rising whine that Jake felt in his bones. He increased collective pitch slowly, feeling the helicopter lighten on its skids, that magical moment when machine became something more. The bell lifted smoothly, climbing through 5 feet, 10, 20, and Jake heard the crowd's reaction change from mocking anticipation to uncertain surprise. He held hover at 50 feet, letting the helicopter settle, reacquainting himself with its weight and balance. Then, with the sun setting behind him and Victoria Reed's challenge ringing in his ears, Jake Sullivan stopped being a janitor and became a pilot again. The first maneuver was simple, an orbit around the heliport at 100 feet, smooth and level. The second was more complex, a steep approach to the pad, flaring hard at the last moment, stopping in hover with the skids inches above concrete. The kind of flying that separated professionals from amateurs, executed with precision that spoke of thousands of hours. He could see faces below now, see confusion replacing mockery, see Victoria Reed's smile beginning to freeze. The third maneuver came from muscle memory deeper than thought, an aggressive climb followed by a tactical descent that looked like a controlled crash, sweeping across the pad at 20 feet. The crowd scattered despite the safety barriers. He was lining up for a fourth maneuver when David's voice exploded through the headset. "Ghost, we've got an emergency. November 82 Romeo just declared Mayday, passenger tour flight with engine failure, 8 souls on board including a child. They're trying to auto-rotate but the pilot's inexperienced. They won't make it back. You're the only qualified rescue pilot in the air." Jake's blood went cold. 8 souls, including a child. Suddenly, Victoria Reed's challenge became irrelevant, and everything narrowed to the crackle of radio traffic and the weight of lives that might depend on what he did in the next 60 seconds. "Position and heading," Jake snapped, his voice carrying combat command authority. David rattled off coordinates, and Jake was already turning, pushing the Bell's nose down, accelerating toward the harbor where a crippled helicopter was falling from the sky. Through the headset, he could hear the other pilot's panicked transmissions, could hear the high-pitched whine of an engine tearing itself apart, could hear something else beneath the mechanical sounds. A child crying. Riley's age, his mind supplied automatically. The crippled helicopter appeared ahead, barely maintaining altitude. Jake could see it struggling, the pilot fighting controls that were becoming increasingly unresponsive. The aircraft would hit water in less than 2 minutes, and everyone aboard would die unless someone did something impossible. Jake keyed the radio, his voice calm. November 8-2 Romeo, this is November 7-4 Golf. I'm a rescue-qualified pilot. Stop fighting the descent and follow my instructions exactly. Maintain auto-rotation, aim for the water near the pier. I'll be there before you touch down. David's voice crackled through the headset again, higher now, more urgent. Jake, I'm looking at the passenger manifest. The child on board. The child's name is Riley Sullivan, 12 years old. I think it's your daughter. The world tilted sideways. Everything Jake had built in 3 years collapsed in an instant. Riley was supposed to be at her grandmother's house. Riley was supposed to be safe, but the universe had cruel timing, and now his daughter was falling from the sky 30 seconds from hitting water. Time compressed. Jake's training took over, overriding panic, channeling terror into precision. He had perhaps 45 seconds before the crippled helicopter hit water. Once it did, he had maybe 90 more before the aircraft sank. The rescue scenario was insane, beyond regulation, the kind of thing that only worked in desperate combat situations. But as Jake watched the other helicopter descending toward dark water, as he thought about Riley's face and her medical bills and everything he had sacrificed, insanity became the only rational choice. The crippled helicopter hit water hard, impact sending spray 50 feet into the air. Jake dropped his own helicopter in a descent that violated every safety regulation, bringing the right skid down to within 6 feet of the water's surface. "Grab the skid," he transmitted. "Grab on and hold tight." He saw movement below, saw adults pushing a child toward the hovering skid, saw small hands reach up and grasp metal. Then Riley's face looked up, water-soaked and terrified, and their eyes met through 40 feet of salt spray. For an instant, everything stopped. Father and daughter finally seeing each other clearly. Then Jake's training reasserted itself because emotion killed people, and he still had 7 more souls to extract. He held position, an exercise in endurance that made his arms burn, while one by one the passengers grabbed the skid and were pulled up. The adults worked with desperate efficiency. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All accounted for. The crippled helicopter's pilot was last, scrambling up just as his aircraft slipped beneath the surface. Jake pulled power and climbed away, his helicopter now carrying 13 people in a space designed for 7. The weight was dangerous, but the heliport was less than 2 minutes away. The heliport appeared ahead, emergency vehicles already staged. Jake brought the overloaded helicopter down with gentleness that defied the circumstances, setting skids on concrete with barely a whisper. The moment they touched, paramedics swarmed the aircraft. Jake sat frozen in the pilot's seat, watching Riley being helped out, wrapped in a thermal blanket, looking back toward the cockpit with questions he wasn't ready to answer. His hands were still locked on the controls, and he realized he was shaking, not from fear, but from aftershocks of what had just happened. David appeared at the pilot door. "That was the most insane piece of flying I've ever seen," he said quietly. "And I flew 3 tours in Afghanistan. She doesn't know, does she? Your daughter doesn't know who you are." It wasn't really a question. Jake finally released the controls. "She knows I'm her father," he said, his voice rough. "She doesn't know about before." David nodded slowly. "She's going to find out. Those cameras caught everything." Jake climbed out on legs that felt disconnected from his body. The crowd had transformed from spectators to witnesses of a rescue operation, their phones still recording. Victoria Reed stood at the edge, her crimson dress incongruous against emergency vehicles, her expression unreadable. Jake walked past her toward Riley, but Victoria's voice stopped him. "Wait!" He turned and saw something he hadn't expected. Shame, raw and genuine. "That was your daughter," Victoria said, struggling with words. On that helicopter. You knew it was her, and you still… She couldn't finish. Jake looked at this woman who had spent the morning mocking him. I didn't have a choice, he said simply. Neither did you. 3 hours ago, when you decided to humiliate someone you didn't know anything about. We all make choices, Ms. Reed. Some just have bigger consequences than others. Riley saw him approaching and pulled away from paramedics, running toward him. Jake caught her, wrapping his arms around his daughter, feeling her shake against him. Dad, she said into his shoulder, that was you. Flying the other helicopter. That was you who saved us. Jake nodded, unable to speak. Riley pulled back, looking up at him with new awareness. But you work at the building. You clean floors. Why didn't you tell me? It was the question Jake had been dreading for 3 years. Let's get you checked out first, he said gently. Then we'll talk. I promise. The paramedics cleared Riley quickly, and Jake wrapped her in his jacket. They had made it halfway to his truck when footsteps approached. Victoria Reed had removed her heels, standing in stockinged feet on cold concrete. I won't keep you, she said, addressing Jake but looking at Riley. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For earlier. For the things I said. For treating people like they're disposable. Victoria pulled out a checkbook, writing quickly, then tearing out the check. $100,000. For Riley's treatment. Not because of any bet, but because it's the right thing to do. She looked at Riley. Your father is a hero. Not because of what he did today, but because he sacrificed everything to take care of you. She met Jake's eyes. When you're ready, I'd like to talk about a real position. Director of Aviation Operations for a new Emergency Services Division. Not charity. You'd be building something that saves lives. The drive home was quiet. Riley wrapped in his jacket, staring out at city lights. Halfway home, she finally spoke. Mom would have been proud, she said softly. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His wife had died 5 years ago. Of what? He asked. Of you, Riley said. For saving those people. For being brave. Jake pulled over, unable to drive and have this conversation. He turned to face his daughter. I need to tell you some things, he said. About who I used to be. About why I stopped. Riley nodded, and Jake took a breath. Before you were born, I was in the military. I flew helicopters in combat zones. I was good at it. They called me the Ghost because I could fly missions other people thought were impossible, but 3 years ago I was flying a rescue mission. I had to choose between getting everyone out or making sure some survived. I chose to get everyone. 2 of my crew died when we crashed. The people we rescued lived, but 2 of my own people died because of my choice. I couldn't fly after that, so I walked away. Riley was crying silently. Jake took her hand. I became a janitor because it was safe, because nobody depended on me for anything important, because I couldn't be responsible for anyone else dying. But I was wrong. Today proved I was wrong. Sometimes the scared choice and the right choice aren't the same thing. Riley threw her arms around him, crying harder. When she pulled back, her eyes were clear. You're not just a janitor, she said firmly. And those people who died, that wasn't your fault. You saved everyone else, but you can't save people if you're too scared to try. Mom was right. You have to stop running. 3 months later, Jake stood in his new office on the 12th floor of Reed Technologies, overlooking the harbor where everything had changed. He had built an emergency aviation division from nothing, hiring pilots, establishing protocols, creating something that actually saved lives. Riley's cancer was in remission, her doctors using words like remarkable and unprecedented. Victoria had changed too, starting a foundation for families dealing with childhood illness, becoming someone who used wealth for something beyond profit. The anniversary of his rescue arrived with autumn returning to the city. That evening, Jake took Riley to the harbor. They stood at the edge of the water, watching helicopters take off in the distance. Do you ever regret it? Riley asked. Coming back to flying, giving up being invisible? Jake thought about it seriously. No, he said finally. I regret the 3 years I wasted being scared. But coming back? Building something that saves lives? Being honest with you? Those are the best decisions I've ever made. Riley took his hand. Mom would be proud of you, she said. I'm proud of you. Jake squeezed her hand gently, feeling the circle close, from loss to fear, to hiding, to revelation, to redemption. I'm proud of you too, he said. You're the bravest person I know. They stood together watching the helicopters until the sky grew dark. Two people who had survived the impossible and built something beautiful from the wreckage. The janitor who had been mocked in that marble lobby no longer existed. In his place stood a man who understood that failure wasn't final, that courage meant trying again after you'd lost everything, that sometimes the worst moments were just preparation for the best ones. Jake Sullivan had been the ghost once, had walked away from that identity, had hidden in shame. But he had learned something essential, that who you are matters less than who you choose to become, that redemption is always possible, and that the greatest courage isn't never falling down, but standing back up when everyone expects you to stay defeated.